Welcome to episode 27 of the Sunday Conversation podcast presented by Finger Lakes One. Today we sit down with Roger Misso. He's a candidate for the 24th Congressional District, which includes parts of Wayne and Cayuga counties. We had about 30 minutes with the Red Creek native and Democrat. It was a really wide-ranging conversation and one you don't want to miss. Before we jump into it, though, a quick reminder that podcasts like this one or Inside the FLX, which tackle important issues through dialogue, are only possible with your continued support. We're asking listeners to become Patreon supporters to help us continue this effort. Visit www.patreon.com/FL1 to learn more. Enjoy our discussion with Roger Misso about the state of politics and where the 24th can go if he's elected next year. And we'll see you back here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming in. First question for you is, do you recall the moment when you knew the time was now to run for Congress? Obviously, that's not a decision to take lightly, and it's probably one that you and your family spent a whole lot of time considering and mulling over. So walk me through what that moment was like and how you got there.
I think it was a series of two moments, actually, Josh, and thanks for having me as well. It's an honor to be here at Finger Lakes One. The first moment was in November of 2016. We just found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child, Amelia, and we were looking forward to a world in which she might grow up with the first woman president of the United States. And obviously, that didn't come to pass. And Christy, my wife, and I looked at our life at the time. I was serving in the Navy, and we felt that we could be doing a lot more for our country in what we knew were shaping up to be very difficult times, times that would challenge American values and our concept of what those things meant. So we vowed that we would do everything that we could to restore responsible, courageous, honorable leadership back to this country. So we volunteered and got involved in the New York's 24th Congressional District race in 2018. And so the second moment really was after we were unsuccessful in that race. The candidate last time was unsuccessful. We looked around at sort of the reasons she might have been unsuccessful and how Democrats have fared in the 24th Congressional District the past couple of cycles, the kinds of voters that they talk to, that they don't talk to, that the Republicans talk to and they don't talk to. And we felt that, and I felt that as a kid who grew up, a small town kid from the County Line Road in rural Wayne County, New York, on the border of Wayne and Cayuga County, that both parties had ignored people from where I grew up. Having been back and worked on issues on the south and the west side of Syracuse, I felt the same thing, that people had ignored those folks in the same way they ignored me and my neighbors in Red Creek. And we thought that it's time for Democrats, it's time for government writ large to show up for everybody again, not just where they think they can get the most votes or take people for granted. So that was really the moment after that election we thought, this is the time. There's no more sitting on the sidelines. I have two kids now. I have my daughter Amelia is 2 years old, and my son Jack is 1 month old now. And the thing I learned in the military early on is don't wait on anybody else to fix your problems, right? And I'm not waiting on anybody else to fix the future for my kids. It's time to stamp up and get the job done.
And of course, another question is going to be, how are you campaigning with a newborn in the house? You must credit your wife a great deal for that.
Oh yeah.
But sort of broader, speaking in broad terms, you spoke back to your rural beginnings. We'll say, how do you reach those folks who are a little more despondent than the average voter, even though there is a lot of that in politics, I would say in general? How do you reach those rural voters and sort of connect with them, reminding them that you are, that's where you came from too?
Right. I think that when people ask this question, Josh, they're looking for like a magic pill that's like, take this position on this issue in rural America and you will magically win majority of the vote. And that's not the case, right? The most important thing, the most radical thing, is also the simplest thing, and it is show up and stick around, right? And your showing up can't be vote for me. Your showing up has got to be tell me about your life, right? Like the same issues that affect people in urban and suburban America affect us in rural America, right? It's economic security, it's healthcare, it's education, it is gun and domestic violence, right? It's agricultural issues. We're a little bit closer to the field side of the equation than the market side some of the time, but these are the things that matter to people, and they are intimately tied into the same issues we're tied into everywhere. And so it's showing up, and that is something that certainly in this race, John Katko just has taken those folks for granted, and I think that's wrong. On the same token, though, Democrats don't show up. And the conventional wisdom is that Democrats win in the urban areas, Republicans win in the rural areas, and the suburban parts of the district are the toss-up. And I call BS on that, right? Because we cannot take people for granted, and especially if we think about, how do we restore American values post-Donald Trump? It can't just be in the cities and the denser suburbs. It's got to be everywhere. No one party, no one region has claim to American values, and we got to stand up, and we got to show up, and we got to show people, look, there's an option, right? We're not crazy leftists. We're Americans. We're patriots, and we're here to take our government back.
Does it feel like there's a little bit too much complacency when you are talking about the parties in terms of what they expect and who they expect to show up and how they expect those votes to turn out, instead of just, as you kind of are describing, reaching out and just having conversations with people and actually trying to connect with them in the process?
Yeah, I think this is modern campaign technology, right, has driven us towards campaigns that are more efficient. Right, and this is the same thing we see in industry outside of campaigns. It's the same thing we see in healthcare, in finance, in agriculture. Everything is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And what does that mean? It drives us to the densest parts of the population, right? So in campaigns, it's driven Democrats in the past to say, where's the biggest bang for my buck going to be? Well, in this district, it's probably Syracuse and Auburn, right? Oswego maybe. Some of the denser suburbs where you can knock doors more easily, you can have events. And they've left rural voters behind, and most of our suburban voters actually behind as well, especially for us north of the Thruway in Onondaga County. Those are the places we need to be, right? Just because something is efficient politically doesn't mean that it is intelligent politically to go all in on that particular strategy, right? So it's, for us, it is proving the worth of voters everywhere, showing up for the value of voters everywhere. That's the most important thing. And again, it sounds it sounds simple, but it's actually radical, right? Show up where it's difficult for you, even where it is. The truth is, just like administering rural health care, right, or rural banking or whatever. It does take a little bit more time to drive. It does take a little more resources to administer, to execute, whatever. But people still have value. And the thing we cannot do is the thing that Donald Trump and John Katko seem to suggest, which is leave your homes and leave upstate New York because, there's no jobs here. It's terrible. It's awful. And again, I call BS, because our economic vision as a region here in central New York cannot be move to the city or move to the suburb, right? People built homes in, Senate and Sempronius. They built homes in Oswego and New Haven and Red Creek and Ontario, right? These are our homes, and we cannot let corporations and really Republicans now in Congress and the White House dictate where our homes ought to be. That's up to us, and that's what we are fighting for. And what we're saying when we show up in places that Democrats and Republicans don't really show up in anymore.
So before we start tackling the issues, I want to ask one last sort of broad question. How do you cut through the noise, if elected, in Congress, in a pretty divisive place, and try to create real progress? There's a lot of people who just think it's a lost cause. Congress is a lost cause. How do you restore, not only restore faith, but restore progress and actually start to make some change in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it starts with showing up. And the fact is today, John Katko hasn't had a real town hall in this district in 822 days. And people notice that. And I think the reason that he hasn't had a real town hall where he's put it out in advance, he hasn't scripted questions, and he invites the entire community on more than just one single issue. I think the reason is he's afraid of getting yelled at. He doesn't want to look bad in public. And what we need is a courageous leader in Congress who isn't afraid for people to come and yell at him in public if that's what it's going to take. That is the equation of government that is broken here, especially in this district. But it is, my job as the next congressman from New York's 24th Congressional District is to show up and to listen to the concerns and the lives and the hopes and the dreams of the people of this district, right? And it is making them feel heard. And if they got to yell out their piece to get their piece out, but at the end of that they feel heard, and I'm still standing there listening to them, that's a giant victory for government today, which is kind of sad because that should be the default. We should show up and listen. I recently took the Town Hall Project's Town Hall Pledge, which says I'm going to hold at least 12 town halls a year in this district, in New York's 24th Congressional District, at least one a month, right? I think that's the basic that we should be doing here. It is, you need to be tied to the district and not like John Katko is, tied to Washington, D.C. And I think that is how we tie in progress on issues that we know we can make progress on, from economic security to healthcare to agricultural reform to gun safety legislation, tying our communities in better with the things we want to get done in Washington. The congressperson is the go-between there. He needs to show up and listen to people and talk with people, not at them or through a phone town hall or through an email summary at the end of the week, right? It needs to be active, engaged all the time. That's what we don't have. I believe in a fundamentally different concept of active governance and representation.
And obviously you've been spending a lot of time talking to residents, talking to voters, taxpayers. What are sort of and there are a ton of issues that we're going to sort of run through later in this half hour or so, but what are sort of the top 2 or 3 that you're hearing the most about that seem to be concerning people the most in the district itself?
That's a great question. And economic security is always at the top of the list, right? I mean, there are a lot of issues that catch our attention depending on what the news cycle is. But as a parent, right, as somebody who has grown up with credit card debt, right, who has 2 kids, trying to put them in through daycare around here, and eventually school in Syracuse City schools, it is the thing you think about before you put your head to the pillow at night, which is, am I providing for my kids? How are we doing with the bills, right? Like, and not just the Buffalo Bills, right? But like our
bills.
Can we pay the mortgage, the rent, right? Like, we're coming up on back to school, right? Like, do we have enough money to get the binders and whatever else our kids need, right? And that is the visceral stuff for people that we just don't talk about around here anymore. But it is the most important thing, right? And it's why you're going to hear me talk a lot about John Katko's vote on the tax cut bill, tax scam bill, whatever you want to call it, right? Raised a lot of people's taxes, or at the very least, made them pay when they were expecting a refund, and it was shocking to people. And what we essentially did was cut taxes for the very wealthy in this country, and you and I paid for it, right? Which is wrong. And now yesterday, as of the recording, I guess, of this podcast, the Dow dropped 800 points, and it looks like we're heading toward a recession. In a time when we should have been recovering economically for the average Central New Yorker, we have gotten nothing. John Katko has raised their taxes, and now we're headed towards a recession that's going to impact working families the most. And that is wrong, right? That is a failure of leadership. That is a failure of government, and it's squarely on John Katko and Donald Trump's backs. So I talk a lot about economic security because it's what people think about every day. I know it's what I think about every day with my wife. So, but other issues, right? Healthcare is an important one, and I fundamentally believe that you shouldn't go bankrupt in this country because you can't afford medical bills, right? Nobody decides to get sick. Not like, I'm going to make a choice today. Let me, have a hernia, right? Mm-hmm. But essentially, we've created a system that penalizes people through no fault of their own for being human beings, right? And that's wrong. I think we ought to get towards universal care. However we do that, however it is politically feasible to do that, I am on board to do. But we got to get to universal care, and we got to cut through the crap of politics and obfuscation on this issue, right? So, economic security and healthcare, a couple of the big ones, and then I think there's a plethora of other issues, right? Gun violence recently is pretty salient in people's minds. Salient in my mind as a parent, right? As I think about my daughter Amelia, she's 2 years old. She's telling jokes now. She thinks she's hilarious. She's so smart. But I think about, kids in Sandy Hook or Newtown, El Paso, Dayton, everywhere. And no parent should have to worry about whether their kid, we should worry about, did they pee their pants at school today, right? Not, are they going to lose their lives, right? Mm-hmm. And we need to come together as a community around these issues. And as somebody who grew up in a family with firearms, when I was 4 years old, my grandfather, who passed away last fall, took me to the hunt club to teach me how to shoot a front end muzzle loader. I don't know if you remember those things, but it's you got the square piece of cloth that fits in the palm of your hand. You put the ball in the middle, some gunpowder, some oil. You stick it at the end of the barrel, and you got the big long plunger that you plunge. It's like you're a Revolutionary War hero, right? But he taught me the importance of safety, of respecting firearms, what they were used for, right? And we seem to have gotten away from that as a country, right? That there are responsible owners of firearms, but that also there are some things about current gun policy and firearm policy that are completely and totally broken, right? Mm-hmm. And there is no middle ground, because we've got Democrats on the one end of the spectrum who say, demand action now. And I get that, because I feel that. I feel angry that this is happening in our country and to our kids. But they never seem to take the time to talk to the people from my family, the people I grew up with. And I think that conversation is how we move the ball forward on the gun violence issue, right? Talking about gun safety legislation. So those are, I think, some of the big issues right now. I know we'll get into more.
And how does so carrying on from the Second Amendment conversation a little bit more, your background, obviously, military background, seems like you are a fitting candidate to have this conversation or to lead this conversation. So I guess the question is, how does it start, or what does it look like when it does start? And how do we get people into that middle ground where there is some give and take on both sides, so that we come up with a sensible solution?
Yeah. Again, show up, right? Sit in a room with people, right? I welcome any opportunity to sit down with folks from Wayne County Scope, right? Cayuga County groups that are dedicated to the Second Amendment, right? Like, these are not the other. I know they probably give a lot of money to my Republican opponent. I don't care, right? We need to sit down and have this conversation, because John Katko is not having the conversation, right? He's putting out a one-paragraph press release saying that there's no one solution to gun violence, and then only proposing one solution to gun violence, right? So for us, it's got to be sit down in a room, and again, there may be some hot emotions there, right? As people on both sides of this issue feel very strongly, right? But the one part of this that there is no both sides to the issue is the safety of our children, right? And I think we can all get together around that. And by keeping that the center of our focus and our conversation, while respecting everybody's opinions, we can start to move the ball forward, right? But it starts with creating spaces where people can come and talk about this, right? And for me, as somebody who's grown up in a very conservative family, a firearm-owning family, my family still hunt today, probably around here, I feel like I can help bring people together around this conversation in a way that other Democrats just can't do, because they grew up in a city. They only shot a weapon when they were in the military, right? So that's what I think I bring to the table is, look, we want to take actual action on this issue, but it requires conversation first.
You mentioned economic security earlier, and of course the tax plan from last year. What does responsible tax policy look like in 2019 or 2020? And how do we start to create a real conversation around what that looks like, because taxes are so complicated to start with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it starts with everybody paying their fair share in this country, and a recognition that we have some of the lowest tax rates that we've ever had in the history of this country right now. We also have some of the greatest income and wealth inequality in this country that is keeping some people, a lot of people, in or near the poverty line, or permanently in this working class environment where we think, like I was taught to believe growing up, that if you work hard, you're going to be able to retire wealthy or retire comfortably. And what people are seeing now, after the past 30 years of this, let's just slash and bottom out the tax rate for the wealthiest 1%, they're seeing is wages that have stagnated, retirements that aren't what they thought they might be, right? So it's, how do we get everybody to pay their fair share, understanding that we're going to be, expanding the base of getting back to broader tax rates for the wealthiest among us, right? I mean, that's where we got to drive to, and it's, the facts speak for themselves. It's I just continue to look back at, you have these graphs like wage stagnation since the 80s has just been constant, right? And our economy does not do a good job of measuring, the things that actually matter in people's lives, right? Our economy doesn't tell us, who is out of the workforce because they can't afford childcare, right? Because in 28 states in this country, childcare, the cost of infant childcare is more expensive than in-state tuition at a public university, which is ridiculous, right? They don't tell us who is not in the workforce because they are taking care of a sick relative, right? Or they're sick themselves, They don't measure, are you in a job that you like and that is actively, you feel like you're on the right path. It's, your mental and emotional stability is there and it's sound. Or are you working two jobs that you hate just to make ends meet, and you are not happy with your life, and that leads to a whole slew of emotional and health consequences, right? So we need to do a better job of measuring how we're actually doing and not looking at the unemployment rate and throwing our hands up in the air and saying everything's fixed. Well, the reality here in Central New York is that it's not, right? And we need to create an economy where more people feel more secure. And when it comes to tax policy, it means a more fair tax system where everybody's paying their fair share.
And when you're talking about the economy and sort of these economic factors, one of the big ones that always seems to come up, especially in these national discussions and debates about what policy needs to change, the student loan crisis, as it's called. How much of an issue is that with the people who you're seeing here in, obviously in the 24th? And does it reflect with sort of that national trend that we're seeing overall, that people really do want to see some change on this front?
Yeah. Well, we're eds and meds, right, in Central New York, Education is a huge part of, in our colleges, universities, community college, are a huge part of who we are as a region, right? And that can be a way to draw people back to this region and start to build this region up again, and that's a longer-term economic security plan. But there is a giant student loan problem in this country, and we need to dig ourselves out of it fast, because it is quickly becoming like 2008 was the mortgage-backed security crisis. We're coming up on a similar crisis for student loans, and that is one where it's going to be a lot harder for us to dig ourselves out of. And I worry about people who today are paying for the entirety of their lives in education that they shouldn't have to be doing. So it's the conversation we have about college and about education is, I think, a little bit misguided, right? We use college, four-year college, a lot of the times when really what we mean is we want education. We want people to be educated throughout their lives, right? That isn't just college, right? For some kids, that might not be the best thing. For some of them, going to a private university and incurring debt might be the wrong thing. So I'm proud of the things that we have done in Central New York to promote trade schools, right? To help people see them not as like a second-rate thing, but as, the top-tier choice, right? It's like your number one, and helping folks get to a point where, it's not just college or you're nobody, right? It's, look, there's value in every kind of work. Some of that work you might need to go to college for. Some of it you can go to a trade school for, a vocational school, right? Some of it you might not need any of that, right? And it's breaking us out of this cultural notion that some work matters more than others. No, right? Like, as we've seen around here, right, when some jobs go away, it makes it more difficult for us as a society, for us as a community to function and to get on. So we saw that when, we lost carrier jobs and crucible steel jobs, right? Like, these are very real things. And so that, having that conversation, right, what we mean is education. In the meantime, we need to make it easier for students to get out of debt or not get in debt in the first place entirely, right? And that's something that government can help with. But that conversation first at the kitchen table with families, with guidance counselors and schools is a key part of this that we need to be having. And that's not something that government should be mandating, right? Like, you must talk this certain way, right? Like, that's not what we should be doing. But it is a conversation as actual, real people and members of the community that we ought to be having. It is happening, and it's happening in Central New York in the right places, and I'm proud of that. But it is elevating that throughout the rest of the country to start to change things for kids who shouldn't have to, be saddled with backbreaking debt their entire lives.
And part of what you're talking about sounds like some philosophical changes to how we approach higher education. Does that also mean that some changes would have to be made on public schools in the K through 12 environment as well? To sort of bridge that gap and make sure that both are working together to sort of foster that lifelong learning goal? Yeah,
I mean, probably. I think it starts with really considering what are the most important things in our public education system. I think that teachers have been, I don't want to say disrespected, but sort of left behind a little bit for too long. And we focus a lot on, districts that are wealthier than, and I mean, look, I came from a very rural school system in Red Creek. Red Creek, though, is one of the best rural schools, I think, in the state of New York. But what we talk about when we talk about where are the good schools, right, a lot of the times we use wealth of a district as a proxy for quality, right? And I think that leads us to a road where we're disadvantaging some kids because they live in lesser means than other kids. When what we really should be doing is, education can be a way out of that, right? Education is an investment in the future of our community. But our funding models at the state level, at the federal level, tend to reinforce those wealth disparities that already exist, right? The city of Syracuse, right, in our region, Syracuse school districts are some of the most segregated in the country. That is wrong, right? We're celebrating 65 years since Brown v. Board of Education. And we have some school district, boundaries that are among the most segregated school district boundaries in the entire country. There's some Supreme Court issues with that, but we need to take action to alleviate those lines and to do things that are going to help kids improve their lives, get access to education that they deserve, that all kids deserve, really. So it's, those things need to be rethought in how we talk about public education in this country, in this region. They are being talked about. My job as a member of Congress is to take those voices that I think right now are at the local level and lift them up and get them some sunlight so we can talk about them and have real conversations instead of folks just talking to each other, in behind closed doors.
And you mentioned at the very beginning here when we sat down the narrative of leave New York, leave. Mm-hmm. And we see plenty of data to show that people are, in fact, leaving New York. But how do you transition that into a conversation, in Congress to sort of foster that growth or that repopulating of, even some of the rural places in the mm-hmm. 24th district or like districts, while also supporting the urban areas, the suburban areas that are still seeing growth of some kind?
Yeah, this is a great question in a number of ways, right? So when I talk about economic security with folks, and I feel this acutely as a parent, right? I talk about building an economy our kids can grow up in, right? Which is not something that we have right now, and not something that John Katko has prioritized, right? And if we have kids who leave for college someplace else, I went to the Naval Academy because I saw opportunity there and was very fortunate to have that opportunity out of rural Red Creek. But an economy that our kids can come back to as well, right? And as a parent, you feel that, right? You feel I would like my kids to move back to the maybe not to the house, right? I don't want them to live with me again, but I want them to feel like they can come back here and we can get back to that sense of family being together. And again, us deciding where our homes are and not corporations or Republicans in Congress or the White House. So that's where we start. An economy our kids can grow up in or they can move back to, right, is important. And I did a little economic development work after leaving and sort of during my time in the Navy, which was my message to my fellow service members who left. A lot of them would go to New York City or San Francisco or a big city, right, to pursue various opportunities. And I always said, that's fine, and this is my general stance on this, which is, if you want to be filthy, stinking rich, right, if you want to try to be the next Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, and money is your goal, then okay, right, go move to New York City, go move to San Francisco. If you want to make a difference, if you want to build a legacy, come to Central New York, right? Those are the people that we need. Those are the people who live and exist here, right? There is so much to be built here. There is so much good about our past that we can build on here, and it takes, just like, Silicon Valley hasn't always been a powerhouse, right? It's because people took a chance on it, right? People need to take a chance on Central New York again, because guess what? We have a lot of the same things that Silicon Valley has, right? We have great public and private educational institutions where we do research and development, right? We have access to capital. It's not too, New York City and Boston, our finance capitals here on the East Coast aren't too far away, right? Our property values and price of capital here locally is not very high, right? Our transportation systems are generally good. Of course they could be better, right? And oh, by the way, you get 4 seasons out here, right? So you get a pretty good workout in the wintertime shoveling snow. So we've got pretty much everything that Silicon Valley and big business places have. What's missing is somebody to drive us here, and somebody who can articulate a vision and hope and revitalize this region. And that's something that I bring to the table. Look, people want to see young leadership here. They want to believe that there are young people here and there is future here, right? And that is something I've got a lot of skin in the game for. I got a 2-year-old and a 1-month-old, and we are raising our kids here. And it is, we want to build a region where, we feel like we're on the rise. And we're doing good things, and I appreciate, Mayor Walsh's Syracuse Surge initiative. I think is, at least looks like it's going in the right direction. So there is a lot we can do to build on that in Congress. I think it takes a Democrat to do it, because clearly John Katko hasn't. But yeah, it's, what are we building for our kids? What is our legacy going to be, right? And it can't be that we're the generation who left our homes and left Central New York for dead. It's got to be we're the generation that came back and helped pick it up and made it great again, I guess, to use the phrase.
That sounds like an absolutely perfect place to leave this conversation. Roger, thanks for coming in.
Thank you,
and thanks for the
Josh.
time.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was an honor.